The rooftop dining room went silent so fast, it felt like someone had cut the power. 1 second, the private club had been a low hum of crystal clinks and soft laughter, the kind of sound made by men who never checked prices. The next, every head turned toward the same spot near the service station, toward the waitress in the plain black uniform, standing with both hands braced on a tray like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "You're telling me you're pregnant," the man in the tailored midnight suit said, loud enough for everyone to hear, calm enough to be cruel. "And you expect me to believe it's mine?" A few people laughed, short, nervous bursts, then stopped when his eyes swept the room and the laughter died on their tongues. The woman beside him, draped in diamonds that looked like they had their own security detail, covered her mouth like she was watching a show. "Oh my God, this is so embarrassing," she whispered, not whispering. The waitress didn't flinch. She kept her chin level. She kept her hands steady. But her stomach clenched so hard she tasted metal. The man leaned back in his chair and smiled like he was doing her a favor. "If you're trying to trap me, you picked the wrong room. You know what happens to liars in my family?" The server's manager, pale and sweating, tried to step in. "Mr. Romano, she's just—" "Sit down," the man said, without raising his voice. The manager sat. The waitress felt every inch of the room watching. The bankers, the politicians, the men with earpieces pretending they were guests. And at the far end of the table, slightly apart from the noise, a different man watched her with a stillness that didn't belong to a dinner. He didn't smile. He didn't look entertained. He looked interested. "You want the truth?" The man in the midnight suit continued. "Fine. We'll do it the clean way. I'll have my doctor run the test. But until then, you don't get to walk out of here and spin a story to the tabloids." He nodded once, almost lazy. Two security men shifted, already moving. The waitress finally spoke, voice low, controlled. "I didn't come here for you." That landed wrong. The room tightened. Mr. Romano's smile faded by a millimeter. "Excuse me?" She should have stopped. She should have apologized. She should have done what every person without power did in rooms like this, shrunk. Instead, she met his eyes. "I came here because someone tried to kill me," she said. The room held its breath. And the man at the far end of the table, the one nobody interrupted, set down his glass with a soft, deliberate click. "Bring her here," he said. Not a suggestion, not a request, a command that made even Mr. Romano's jaw go rigid. The waitress didn't look at the security men. She didn't look at the guests. She stared at the man who'd spoken, the one with the quiet voice and the heavy presence, because she recognized him. Not from the news, not from whispered rumors, from a hospital hallway where nobody was supposed to see him, from the night her whole life split in two. And now, in a room filled with people who thought she was nothing, the most dangerous man on the rooftop was asking for her by choice. Hours earlier, Livia Hart had told herself she could survive one more shift. She'd said it like a prayer while standing in the employee bathroom of the club, palms flat on the sink, breathing through the nausea that came in waves she'd learned to hide. The mirror had shown a woman who looked put together from a distance. Hair pinned clean, lipstick neutral, uniform pressed. But up close, there were tiny betrayals. The faint shadow under her eyes. The way she swallowed too carefully. The way her hand hovered over her abdomen like she was guarding a secret. 14 weeks wasn't enough to show unless you knew what to look for. But Livia knew. She felt it in her body like a second heartbeat she couldn't ignore. She also felt the clock. The club, Orem House, sat on the top floors of a building that didn't have a public lobby. You got in by invitation, by membership, by being the kind of person whose name opened doors without a keycard. Livia didn't belong to that world, but she'd learned its rules, the way you learned traffic patterns in a dangerous neighborhood. Quickly, quietly, with your life depending on it. No eye contact unless spoken to. No opinions, no mistakes, no drama. Tonight, She'd broken the last rule before she even walked onto the floor. The assistant manager had pulled her aside near the kitchen pass, voice tight. VIP mezzanine. Table 13. They requested a specific server. Livia's throat had gone dry. A specific server? He wouldn't meet her eyes. Don't ask questions. Just do your job. That was when she'd seen the security presence. Not the obvious kind, not men scanning like they were in a movie. This was subtler. Men in suits who didn't drink, men who sat with their backs to walls, men whose hands never fully relaxed. And then the guests arrived. Mr. Romano, Julian Romano, came in like he expected the room to move for him. He was young, polished, and cruel in the way people got when they'd never faced consequences. The kind of rich that wasn't just money, but entitlement. He carried himself like he was already in charge of something bigger than the club. The woman beside him, his date, his accessory, laughed too loudly at everything he said. And behind them, the real gravity entered. A man in a dark suit, no flash, no jewelry, no theatrical presence. He looked like he didn't need it. His hair was combed back neatly, but not in a vain way, more like a habit. His face was calm, almost unreadable, except for his eyes. They didn't roam like other men's eyes. They assessed. Livia had felt it like a temperature drop. The moment he entered, the room had adjusted around him without anyone admitting they were doing it. Her hands had tightened on her tray so hard her fingertips went numb. Because she knew the name, even if no one said it out loud. Nico Valente. Some people called him a businessman. Some people called him a shadow that wore a suit. In her world, he was the reason certain streets stayed quiet and certain men disappeared. He wasn't loud. He wasn't performative. He was final. Livia had kept her head down and moved like she belonged. Water poured from the right, plates cleared from the left, voice soft, steps measured. But keeping your head down didn't keep you safe if someone wanted to see your face. The first thing Julian Romano did after ordering was notice her. Not like a normal guest noticed staff. Not with irritation or indifference. With attention. He watched her pour a glass of sparkling water as if she were lying to him with her hands. Then he leaned toward his date and said something that made her giggle, eyes sweeping down Livia's body like she was a rumor. Livia turned away before they could see the reflex in her expression. She'd practiced that too. The club had its own language. Power spoken in tiny gestures. A pause before answering. A look exchanged between men who weren't supposed to know each other. The way the security staff stepped closer to a table without being asked. Livia understood enough to know something else. This dinner wasn't just a dinner. It was a meeting. There were folders under the table. There were phones kept face down. There were quiet arguments disguised as jokes. And somewhere inside that, something was about to go wrong. It started with a simple request. "Waitress," Julian said, snapping his fingers like he was calling a dog. "Bring me the private menu." "We don't have a private menu, sir," Livia replied. Polite, controlled. Julian's mouth curved. "Everyone has a private menu. You just have to be the right kind of customer." His date laughed again. "Maybe she can't read it." Livia didn't react. She didn't give them the satisfaction. She turned to leave. Julian's voice followed her, low enough to be meant for her and no one else, sharp enough to cut. "Don't walk away from me like you're better than this. I can have you fired before you reach the bar." Livia kept walking, because being fired would have been the least dangerous thing that could happen to her tonight. At 9:17 p.m., as she set down a plate in front of Nico Valente without looking him in the eye, her phone vibrated once in the pocket of her apron. She didn't check it. She didn't need to. Only one person used that vibration pattern. One buzz. No call. No mercy. A message meant to be read immediately. Livia finished placing the dish, stepped back, and let her gaze drop to the white tablecloth like she was studying a stain. Then, with her hands steady, she slid her fingers into her pocket and read the screen with the smallest movement of her eyes. "He knows. Leave now." Livia's heart didn't race. It dropped, because she'd spent weeks convincing herself nobody knew where she worked, and because the last time she'd been told to leave now, she'd walked out of a building and found a car waiting that wasn't supposed to be there. She forced her breath to stay even. She forced her face to stay blank. She lifted her head just enough to look at the room through her lashes. Julian Romano was watching her again, and this time, he wasn't smiling. He was calculating, like he'd finally found the button that would make her react. Julian Romano didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He let the silence do the work. Livia stood at the edge of the VIP mezzanine with a tray balanced against her hip, eyes lowered, shoulders relaxed in the practiced posture of someone who knew how to disappear. But every nerve in her body was tuned to the room like a wire under tension. The message burned in her pocket. He knows. Leave now. She could walk away. She could hand the tray to another server, say she felt sick, slip into the service elevator, melt into the street below, and never come back. But the club didn't work like a normal job. Orem House had rules, cameras, key cards, doors that only opened from the inside, and security men who smiled politely while memorizing your face. If someone knew, leaving might not be an exit. It might be the moment she got intercepted in the hallway where no one could hear her. Julian lifted his glass and studied her over the rim, like a person watching an animal decide whether to bolt. "You're shaking," his date said, delighted. Is she shaking? Livia wasn't. Not visibly. That was the point. Her hands were still. Her breathing was slow. She'd trained herself for this long before she ever wore a uniform. Julian set his glass down. "Come here." Livia stepped forward because refusing a command in a room like this wasn't defiance. It was suicide. She approached the table with the controlled glide the club drilled into staff. The table itself looked like a private museum exhibit, linen so white it almost glowed, cutlery heavy enough to be used as a weapon, a centerpiece of orchids that smelled like money. Nico Valente sat slightly apart from Julian, angled so he could see the room behind him without turning his head. He didn't touch his drink. He didn't perform dominance. He simply existed, and the men around him adjusted. Livia kept her eyes down as she set the water carafe near Julian's hand. Julian didn't thank her. He tapped the edge of her tray with one finger. "What's your name?" "Livia," she said. He smiled like her name offended him. "That's not your real name." Her stomach tightened, but her face didn't change. "It's the name on my badge, sir." Julian leaned toward his date and spoke as if Livia weren't there. "She has the audacity to play innocent." His date's eyes glittered. "Maybe she thinks you're dumb." Julian's gaze snapped back to Livia. "You know what I think? I think you saw my name on the reservation list and decided this was your shot." Livia didn't answer. Julian's smile sharpened. "The sad part is, it almost would have worked. A soft little story, a brave little face. I'm just a waitress. People love that." He tilted his head like he was examining a stain. "But you made one mistake." Livia could feel the room listening without looking. "What mistake?" she asked. Julian's eyes dropped, not to her chest, not to her waist, lower, to the subtle way she had shifted her weight, the way her hand had hovered near her abdomen earlier when nausea hit. "You're guarding something," he said, "like it's valuable." His date giggled. "Oh my God, is she pregnant?" Julian didn't laugh. He kept his eyes on Livia. "Are you?" The question wasn't private. It wasn't even meant to be answered. It was meant to pin her to the wall in front of everyone. Livia could feel her heartbeat in her throat, but she didn't let it touch her voice. "Yes," she said. That was the moment the air changed. It wasn't outrage. It wasn't shock. It was interest. Men who'd been pretending to discuss wine suddenly stopped pretending. The bodyguards became very still. A few heads turned, just slightly, as if they couldn't help themselves. Julian's date covered her mouth again, laughing like she'd been handed the best gossip of the year. Julian leaned back, satisfied. "And whose is it?" Livia's mind moved fast. If she said the truth, she'd be dead before dessert. If she lied, she'd still be dead, just slower. So she did the only thing that kept her alive in rooms filled with predators. She gave nothing. "I'm here to work," she said. "That's all." Julian's expression darkened. "Wrong answer." He looked around the table. "You know what's funny? Men in my world deal with liars all the time. We just don't usually get them served with appetizers." His date whispered, thrilled. "Julian?" He ignored her. He looked down the mezzanine, toward the manager hovering near the rope line, pale as paper. "Bring me the club doctor," Julian said. "Now." The manager flinched. "Mr. Romano, the doctor is—" Julian didn't raise his voice. "Now." The manager nodded too quickly and hurried away. Livia's skin went cold. A doctor here meant one thing. This wasn't a restaurant anymore. It was a controlled environment, a place where powerful people could do whatever they wanted and call it private. She felt Nico Valente's gaze on her for the first time like a physical pressure. Not leering, not mocking, measuring. Julian watched her notice it and smiled. "You know who you're serving tonight, right?" Julian asked, almost casual. Livia didn't respond. Julian gestured with his glass, like he was introducing a guest speaker. "That man there? Nico Valente." A ripple moved through the nearby tables. Tiny reactions quickly suppressed. Julian continued, enjoying it. "He doesn't waste time. He doesn't tolerate problems. And he definitely doesn't tolerate women who think they can use this room to manipulate outcomes." Livia's throat tightened, but she forced herself to speak evenly. "I'm not manipulating anything." Julian leaned forward, eyes bright. "Then say it. Say the baby isn't mine." Livia felt the trap close. If she said yes, Julian won. He'd publicly humiliated her, proven she was lying, turned her into a joke. If she refused, he'd claim she was trying to pin a pregnancy on him. Either way, he got the spectacle. And somewhere in the back of her mind, the warning message repeated itself like a siren. He knows. Leave now. Her fingers curled around the edge of her tray until the plastic creaked. She heard herself speak before she fully decided to. "It's not yours." Julian's date gasped, delighted. "Oh my God." Julian's smile widened. "There it is. So you admit you came in here with a pregnancy and no father and thought you'd— what? Get sympathy? Get money?" Livia kept her eyes on Julian. "I came in here because I had to." Julian's gaze sharpened. Had to. He turned his head slightly toward Nico Valenti. "You hearing this? She had to." Nico didn't react. He didn't even glance at Julian. He kept his attention on Livia as if Julian were background noise. That terrified her more than anything Julian had said, because Julian wanted to play. Nico Valente looked like a man deciding whether she was a threat. The manager returned with a man in a crisp suit carrying a small black medical case. The club doctor looked like someone who could deliver bad news without changing his pulse. Julian gestured to the empty space beside Livia like she was a specimen. "Test her." The doctor hesitated for half a second, then looked toward Nico, not Julian. That single detail hit Livia like a punch. Julian Romano might be loud, rich, and connected, but he wasn't the one in charge here. Nico Valente spoke softly. "Not here." The doctor froze. Julian's smile flickered. Julian recovered fast. "Not here?" he repeated, amused. "You going soft, Nico?" Nico finally looked at Julian. The room seemed to shrink around that glance. Julian's amusement died instantly. Nico's voice stayed calm. "You can embarrass yourself all you want. You don't turn my table into a circus." Julian's jaw tightened, but he nodded like he was agreeing, even as humiliation crawled under his skin. Nico turned back to Livia. "What did you mean," he asked, "when you said you had to?" Livia's mouth went dry. This was the moment, the one she'd been avoiding for weeks. Because the truth wasn't just dangerous, it was explosive. She forced her lungs to work. "Someone is following me," she said. Julian snorted, trying to get the attention back. Oh, come on. Nico didn't look at him. Who? Livia's gaze flicked toward the glass wall that wrapped the rooftop. Beyond it, the city glittered, untouchable, indifferent. Then she looked back at Nico Valente, and for the first time her control cracked just enough for the truth to show in her eyes. The man who killed the baby's father, she said. The table went still. Julian's date stopped laughing. Even the doctor looked uncomfortable, and Nico Valente's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. Recognition or warning, or both. Julian leaned forward, incredulous. This is insane. Livia didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on Nico. His name was Daniel, she said quietly, and he worked for you. Nico's glass remained untouched, but his fingers, resting on the table, stopped moving completely. Julian Romano laughed first, not because it was funny, because he thought it was ridiculous. Daniel, he repeated, you're going to throw a dead man into this? Livia didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on Nico Valente. Daniel Mercer. She didn't say the last name out loud. She didn't need to. Nico's gaze didn't flicker. His face remained composed, almost indifferent. But something subtle shifted in the room. A tightening. A recalibration. Julian leaned back in his chair and scoffed. Daniel worked logistics. He wasn't important. That's not true, Livia said before she could stop herself. Julian's head snapped toward her. You knew him that well? The trap was obvious. Push her into over-explaining. Push her into emotion. Make her look hysterical. She refused. He was important to someone, she said carefully. Nico finally spoke. How did you know Daniel Mercer? The question wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was the kind of question that required precision. Livia's heartbeat slowed instead of speeding up. This was the moment she had prepared for. He was my fiancé, she said. The word landed heavier than pregnancy. Julian's smirk faltered. The date beside him blinked, suddenly unsure whether she was watching entertainment or something real. Nico's eyes stayed on Livia's face. For how long? He asked. 3 years, she said. We kept it private. Julian scoffed again, but there was less confidence in it now. Convenient. Livia didn't acknowledge him. He died 6 weeks ago, she continued. Officially, it was a car accident. She paused. It wasn't. The room felt smaller. The mezzanine, once filled with curated luxury, now felt like a courtroom where the wrong answer could cost someone everything. Julian's voice sharpened. Careful. Livia ignored him. I was supposed to be in that car, she said. That pulled the oxygen out of the air. Julian stared at her. What? He told me not to come, she said quietly. Last minute. Said the meeting changed. Nico's gaze sharpened just slightly. What meeting? Livia held his eyes. You know what meeting? Julian slammed his hand lightly against the table. That's enough. But Nico didn't look at Julian. He was still watching her. What exactly are you implying? Nico asked. Livia chose her words like she was stepping across glass. I'm implying, she said slowly, that Daniel knew something. Julian stood abruptly. This is insane. She's trying to spin a story. You see that, right? His date looked uncomfortable now, no longer amused. Nico's voice remained even. Sit down. Julian hesitated. It was small, barely noticeable, but everyone saw it. Then Julian sat. Livia felt it, the shift. The room did not revolve around Julian Romano. It revolved around Nico Valente. Continue, Nico said. Livia swallowed once. The night he died, Daniel deleted files from his laptop, she said. Encrypted copies. Offshore transfers. A trust. Julian's face changed. There it was. A crack. A trust? Nico repeated. Yes. For whom? Livia's hand finally moved, just slightly, resting against her lower abdomen. For his child. Silence. Julian's date stared at her stomach. Julian's jaw clenched so hard the muscle twitched. Nico's eyes followed the movement of her hand. "You're certain?" he asked. "Yes," Julian snapped. She could have gotten that information anywhere. Livia turned her head slightly toward him for the first time. "Not the way the trust was structured," she said calmly. Julian went still. Nico noticed. "What do you know about the structure?" Nico asked. This was the edge of the cliff. If she said too much, she exposed herself. If she said too little, she lost credibility. "It required a living beneficiary to activate," she said. "Not a spouse, not an executor." She paused. "A biological heir." Julian's chair scraped faintly against the floor as he shifted. Nico didn't move. "And how do you know that?" Nico asked. "Because I was in the room," she said. Julian's eyes widened. "You were never in those meetings," he said too quickly. Livia looked at him. "I wasn't supposed to be," she said. That landed harder than anything else. Julian had slipped, and Nico saw it. The subtle tilt of Nico's head wasn't dramatic. It was analytical. "Who else was in the room?" Nico asked. Livia's heart pounded once, hard. She didn't answer immediately, because this was the line. Cross it, and there was no going back. Julian leaned forward, eyes dark now. Not mocking, dangerous. "Think very carefully," he said. Nico didn't interrupt. He let the pressure build. Livia inhaled slowly. "Daniel," she said. "You." A beat. "And Julian." Julian stood again, this time without pretending. "That's it." His security shifted closer to the table. "You're out of your depth," Julian said coldly. "You don't understand what you're doing." Livia looked at him without flinching. "I understand exactly what I'm doing." Julian's voice dropped. "You're pregnant and scared and desperate. That doesn't give you the right to—" "Enough," Nico said. Not loud. Final. Julian stopped mid-sentence. The security men froze. Nico stood slowly from his chair. The entire mezzanine instinctively straightened. He walked around the table, not rushed, not theatrical, until he stood directly in front of Livia. Up close, he was quieter than Julian. That was worse. He studied her face like he was reading a document. "You're either very brave," he said softly, "or very reckless." "Neither," she replied. "What then?" "Prepared." Julian scoffed under his breath. Nico ignored him. "If Daniel created a trust," Nico said, "and if that trust requires a biological heir." His eyes dropped briefly to her abdomen. "Then you're not here for sympathy." "No. You're here for protection." Livia didn't deny it, because that was the truth. Julian laughed again, but there was strain in it now. "You're not seriously considering this," he said to Nico. "You're going to let a waitress rewrite family business based on, what? Emotion?" Nico's gaze flicked toward Julian for half a second, and something unspoken passed between them. A calculation. Julian saw it, and for the first time that night. Julian looked uncertain. Nico turned back to Livia. "Who sent the message?" he asked quietly. Her pulse spiked. He knew. He knew there had been a message. "How did you—" "You checked your phone," he said. "You didn't panic. You adjusted." He leaned slightly closer. "Who warned you?" Livia hesitated, because if she said the name, she burned the only ally she had left. Julian's expression hardened. He knew there was a leak, and now he knew it was close. Livia exhaled slowly. "It doesn't matter," she said. "It matters," Nico replied. Julian's voice cut in, sharp and urgent now. "She's lying. This is manipulation." Nico didn't look at him. Instead, he made a small gesture to one of his men near the entrance. "Lock the floor," Nico said calmly. The bodyguard nodded and moved. The rope barrier dropped. The elevator access panel blinked red. The rooftop club was no longer a dining room. It was a closed system. Julian stared at Nico. "What are you doing?" Nico's voice stayed steady. "I'm finding out," he said, "who's trying to kill a pregnant woman inside my building." And in that moment, the balance shifted. The click of the elevator locking echoed too loud. It wasn't a dramatic sound, just a soft mechanical shift. But everyone on the mezzanine understood what it meant. No one was leaving. Julian Romano stood rigid beside the table, jaw tight, hands flexing once at his sides before he controlled himself. "This is unnecessary," he said evenly. But the edge was there now. "You're turning a dinner into a spectacle." Nico Valenti didn't raise his voice. "You turned it into one," he said. The difference was simple. Julian wanted control. Nico already had it. Livia stood exactly where she had been, tray still in her hand, like a shield she no longer needed. Her nausea had vanished, replaced by a strange clarity. Fear was still there, but it was focused. Julian looked at her again, and now there was no mockery in his expression. There was calculation. "You said someone tried to kill you," Julian said slowly. "That's a serious accusation." "Yes. Against who?" "I didn't say." Julian's eyes narrowed. "You're implying." Livia didn't respond, because implication was safer than accusation. Nico stepped closer to her, close enough that she could smell the faint trace of cedar and smoke in his cologne. Not overpowering, intentional. "Daniel Mercer reported directly to me," Nico said. "For 7 years." Livia met his eyes. "I know." Julian shifted again. "You're not actually entertaining this." Nico ignored him. "When Daniel died," Nico continued, "I saw the report. Brake failure, late night, wet road." "He never drove in the rain," Livia said. Julian laughed sharply. "That's your argument? Weather?" "No," she said. "Pattern." That word made Nico pause. "Explain," he said. Livia steadied her voice. "Daniel was obsessive, predictable. He took the same route to work, same parking level, same mechanic, same car service records." Julian crossed his arms, but his knuckles were pale. "And?" Nico asked. "And 3 days before he died, he changed his route," she said. "Changed his parking level and cancelled his regular mechanic appointment." Nico didn't blink. "Why?" he asked. "He told me he was being watched." The room didn't gasp. It tightened. Julian's voice went cold. "Anyone in our world is watched." "He said it wasn't law enforcement," Livia replied. "He said it was internal." That word dropped heavier than anything else tonight. Internal. Julian took a step forward. "You're stepping into territory you don't understand." Livia turned her head slightly toward him. "I understand that the man I was going to marry didn't die by accident." Julian's composure cracked just enough for Nico to see it, and Nico was watching him now. "Internal," Nico repeated. Julian exhaled through his nose. "She's guessing. Anyone could say that?" "Not anyone," Livia said quietly. Nico's gaze returned to her. "Why you?" Because she'd been in the room. Because Daniel had trusted her. Because she'd read documents she wasn't supposed to see. Because Daniel had loved her enough to break rules. But she didn't say any of that. "Because I was there the night before he died," she said instead. Julian went still. Nico didn't move. "What night?" Nico asked. "The meeting," she said. Julian's voice sharpened. "She was not in that meeting." Livia's eyes locked on Nico. "I was in the hallway," she corrected. Julian stared at her. "And I heard you," she said. Silence. Not loud silence. Dead silence. "What did you hear?" Nico asked. Livia felt the floor beneath her like it might shift. This was the blade's edge. "I heard Daniel say the numbers didn't match," she said. Julian's jaw flexed. "I heard him say the transfer amounts were off by 12%. Nico's expression didn't change. Julian's did. "That's confidential," Julian said. "Exactly," Livia replied. The air between Julian and Nico became electric. 12%. That wasn't gossip. That wasn't something you picked up from a rumor. That was specific. Nico's voice remained calm. 12%, he repeated. Julian recovered quickly. "Rounding errors, timing discrepancies." Livia shook her head slightly. Daniel said it was deliberate. Julian stepped toward her now, no longer playing. You're building a story around fragments, he said. You think you can walk in here pregnant and scare us into rewriting history? I'm not trying to scare you, she said. Then what are you doing? He demanded. Her hand moved again to her abdomen, protecting what's left. Nico saw it. Not the gesture, the sincerity. Julian scoffed, but there was strain in it. She's trying to leverage sympathy. Nico finally looked directly at Julian. Were the numbers off? He asked. Julian didn't hesitate. No. Too fast. Nico noticed. Livia noticed Nico noticing, and Julian realized it half a second too late. That's not the point, Julian said, adjusting his tone. The point is, she's destabilizing this room. Nico's gaze remained on him. 12% is not rounding. Julian didn't respond. Nico turned back to Livia. If Daniel believed there was internal theft, he said evenly, and if he structured a trust requiring a biological heir, he paused. Then whoever benefited from the discrepancy would have motive. Julian's face hardened. You're not suggesting... I'm not suggesting anything, Nico said calmly. He looked back at Livia. Who else knew about the trust? Livia hesitated, because this was the part that could get someone killed. Daniel told one person, she said. Julian leaned forward. Who? Livia swallowed. You. The word didn't explode. It settled. Nico's eyes didn't widen. But something ancient and dangerous flickered in them. I never discussed that trust with anyone, Nico said quietly. You didn't have to, Livia replied. Julian laughed once, sharp. She's bluffing. Livia kept her eyes on Nico. The clause was handwritten, she said. Julian's breath caught. You don't draft clauses by hand anymore. Nico's fingers, resting lightly against the table edge, stilled completely. Livia continued, voice steady. You only do that when you don't want it digitally archived. Julian's face had gone pale, and Nico finally understood something. She wasn't guessing. She had seen it, or someone had told her. Either way, she wasn't random. The mezzanine door near the kitchen opened quietly. One of Nico's senior security men stepped forward and leaned toward him. Low voice. Controlled. Sir, we checked the exterior feeds. Nico didn't look away from Livia. And? There's a car downstairs that's been idling for 47 minutes. Julian's head snapped toward the guard. Livia's stomach dropped. The guard continued. Plates are covered. The room shifted. Julian's voice cut in immediately. This is ridiculous. You're connecting dots that aren't there. But for the first time tonight, Julian wasn't driving the narrative. Nico turned slowly toward him. 47 minutes, Nico said softly. Julian spread his hands. It's Manhattan. Cars idle. Nico didn't blink. Lock down the stairwells, he told his men. Julian's composure fractured. You can't just... I can, Nico said. And everyone in the room knew he could. Livia felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in weeks. Not safety, but alignment. The hunter wasn't sure who the prey was anymore. Nico turned back to her. Who sent the message? He asked again. Livia's pulse pounded. She could lie. She could protect the name, or she could gamble everything. She inhaled slowly. It was someone inside your organization, she said. Julian's eyes went dark. Nico didn't look surprised. He looked prepared. Julian Romano smiled again. But this time it was thin. Careful. Inside, he repeated lightly. You're accusing the entire organization now? Livia didn't blink. I'm saying Daniel was scared, she said. And he wasn't scared of outsiders. Nico studied her for a long moment. The rooftop lights reflected faintly in his eyes, but his expression remained unreadable. Names, he said. Livia's pulse hammered in her ears. If she said Julian's name outright, this ended violently. If she stayed vague, she lost credibility. So she chose a third option. I don't know who pulled the trigger, she said, but I know who benefited. Julian exhaled sharply. You're delusional. Nico's gaze shifted slightly toward Julian, but only slightly. Benefited how? Nico asked. The 12% discrepancy vanished the week after Daniel died, Livia said. Julian's face froze. Nico didn't move. Vanished? He repeated. Yes. Julian recovered quickly. Of course it vanished. Accounting corrected it. Accounting doesn't correct something that never existed, Livia replied calmly. Julian's voice turned sharp. You weren't in finance. No, she agreed, but Daniel was. The rooftop felt colder. Nico's voice remained even. You're making a serious allegation. I'm stating a pattern, she said. Nico held her gaze. Why come here? He asked. Why not disappear? Because she had tried. Because someone had followed her. Because the car downstairs wasn't a coincidence. Because she'd realized too late that the safest place to hide was the lion's den itself. You protect what belongs to you, she said quietly. Julian's eyes narrowed. And you think this belongs to him? Julian asked, gesturing toward Nico. You think carrying a child gives you leverage? Livia turned slowly toward Julian for the first time since the floor locked down. No, she said. It gives me motive to survive. That hit harder than anger would have. Julian stepped closer, his voice dropping low enough to be almost intimate. You don't survive in our world by making threats. I'm not threatening you. Then what are you doing? She held his gaze, giving him a reason not to let me die. The security men around the mezzanine didn't move, but their posture shifted. Julian noticed, and Nico noticed Julian noticing. Nico turned slightly, signaling one of his senior men. Get me the ledger from Daniel's last quarter, Nico said calmly. Julian went rigid. That's unnecessary. Nico didn't look at him. Bring it. The man nodded and stepped away. Julian's composure fractured just slightly. You're entertaining fiction, he said. She's feeding you drama because she's desperate. Nico finally looked directly at Julian. If she's lying, he said quietly, it will collapse under paper. Julian's jaw tightened. And if she's not? Julian asked. Nico didn't answer. The rooftop door opened again. The security guard returned. Sir, he said, low. The car downstairs just turned off its headlights. Livia's heart dropped. Julian snapped, Coincidence? Nico didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked at Livia. You said someone is following you? Yes. Since when? 2 weeks after Daniel's death. Julian scoffed. Livia ignored him. Black sedan, she continued. Same car 3 times. Different driver once. Nico's eyes narrowed slightly. You're observant. I had to be. Julian laughed softly. Paranoia looks a lot like imagination. Livia's gaze flicked to him. Then why did your security increase after Daniel died? Julian froze. It was subtle, but Nico saw it. You increased security? Nico asked calmly. Julian's voice was steady, but thinner now. Standard protocol. For what threat? Nico asked. Julian hesitated half a second too long. That's enough, he said abruptly. You're letting a pregnant waitress question family operations in public? Nico turned fully toward Julian now. In public? He repeated. The mezzanine was sealed. The guests had been quietly escorted toward the lower level. Only inner circle men remained. Julian realized too late what he had revealed. Nico stepped closer to him. You're nervous, Nico said softly. Julian's nostrils flared. I'm irritated. There's a difference. Julian's eyes flicked to Livia, then back to Nico. This is manipulation, Julian insisted. She's using the baby as leverage. Nico didn't deny it. Perhaps, he said. Julian blinked. But leverage only works, Nico continued calmly, if there is something to move. Silence. Julian stared at him. You think I'd kill Daniel over accounting? Julian asked. Nico didn't answer. Livia's voice cut through the tension. He told me he trusted you, she said to Nico. That changed the room again. Julian's face hardened. Nico's expression did not. He trusted you more than anyone, she continued. That's why he didn't expect what happened. Julian stepped forward suddenly. You're crossing a line. Livia didn't back up. You crossed it first? Julian's hand twitched, just slightly, like he was considering something impulsive. 3 security men shifted immediately, not toward Livia, toward Julian. Julian saw it, and that was the first moment he looked genuinely unsettled. You're letting her poison this, Julian said quietly to Nico. Nico didn't respond. Instead, he asked Livia one final question. Did Daniel tell you where the physical copy is? Julian's head snapped toward her. Livia saw it. The panic. There it was. Yes, she said. Julian's face drained. Where? Nico asked. Livia held Nico's gaze. Safe deposit box, she said. Under my name. Julian swore under his breath. Nico's eyes darkened slightly. And what does it contain? He asked. Livia swallowed once. Transfer authorizations, she said. Julian's voice exploded. This is insane. And a secondary beneficiary clause, she continued. Julian lunged a half-step forward. Nico's security intercepted him instantly. Not violently, just firmly. A reminder. Julian stared at Nico. You're choosing her over me? He asked quietly. Nico's voice remained calm. I'm choosing information. Julian's breathing grew heavier. She's lying. Then we'll confirm it, Nico said. The security guard returned again, whispering in Nico's ear. Nico listened without reacting. Then he looked at Livia. The car downstairs just received a call, he said. Livia's stomach dropped. Nico continued. The call lasted 9 seconds. Julian swallowed. Trace it, Nico ordered. The guard nodded and stepped away. Julian stared at Livia now, not with mockery, with calculation, and something darker. You're playing a dangerous game, Julian said softly. Livia met his eyes. I didn't start it. The elevator panel blinked again, and the security guard returned one last time. His voice was lower now. Sir, he said to Nico, the call came from inside the building. The rooftop went still. Julian's face changed. Nico turned his head slowly toward him. And for the first time tonight. Julian looked afraid. The sentence didn't echo. It settled. The call came from inside the building. Julian Romano didn't move. That was the problem. Men like Julian always reacted. Anger, sarcasm, dismissal. But now he stood perfectly still, as if any motion might betray him. Nico Valente didn't look at him immediately. He let the silence stretch. How many internal lines accessed the rooftop feed? Nico asked calmly. The security guard answered without hesitation. 4. List them. Main security desk, private office level, executive elevator panel, and... He hesitated. And? Nico prompted. The mezzanine auxiliary line. Every eye shifted. That line was 10 feet from Julian's chair. Julian let out a short breath through his nose. Coincidence? Nico turned slowly toward him. You've said that twice tonight. Julian's jaw flexed. Because that's what it is. Livia felt the air change again, not in her favor. In Julian's. Because now this wasn't about her pregnancy. It wasn't about Daniel. It was about a breach. And breaches demanded containment. Julian straightened his jacket slightly. You're letting paranoia infect your own floor, he said calmly now, finding footing again. A car idles. A phone rings. A waitress tells a dramatic story. That's all this is. Nico studied him. You accessed the mezzanine line, Nico said. Julian's expression didn't flicker. I check feeds often. During dinner? Julian didn't answer immediately. There it was again. Half a second too slow. Livia saw it, and Nico saw that she saw it. The power dynamic shifted a millimeter. Not dramatic, but real. Pull the timestamps, Nico said to security. Julian's composure thinned. You're treating me like a suspect. Nico's voice remained level. I'm treating the situation like a threat. Julian stepped forward. And you think I'm the threat? Nico didn't respond. He didn't need to. The silence answered for him. Julian laughed once, sharp. This is absurd. He turned toward Livia suddenly, eyes cold. You realize what happens if you're wrong? It wasn't a question. It was a promise. Livia met his gaze. I'm not. Julian stepped closer to her. Security shifted again, but this time Nico lifted one hand slightly. Wait. Julian leaned down just enough so only she could hear. You should have left when you got the message. Her heart skipped. He knew about the message. That was the confirmation she needed. You sent it? She asked quietly. Julian's mouth curved faintly. You think I'd warn you? Her blood ran cold. That meant one thing. There was another player. Nico watched the exchange carefully. What did he just say? Nico asked. Livia didn't look away from Julian. He said I should have left. Julian scoffed. She's fishing. Nico's gaze sharpened. Did you send the message? Nico asked Julian directly. Julian didn't hesitate this time. No. Truth or practiced lie? Nico held his gaze longer than comfort allowed. Then, the security guard's voice cut through the tension again. Sir? Nico didn't look away from Julian. Yes? The call from the mezzanine line. It originated 30 seconds after Miss Hart checked her phone. The timing hung in the air like smoke. Julian's face darkened. That proves nothing. Nico finally turned away from him. Bring me the access log. The guard nodded and moved quickly. Julian's voice dropped, controlled but tight. You're humiliating me in my own house. Nico looked at him evenly. This isn't your house. The statement wasn't loud, but it carried finality. Julian inhaled slowly, recalibrating. Fine, he said. Let's follow her logic. He turned toward Livia again. You claim Daniel created a trust. Yes. You claim the discrepancy disappeared. Yes. You claim someone followed you. Yes. Julian spread his hands. And your solution was to come here, to this building, to confront us in public. I didn't confront anyone, she said. You accused me. I stated facts. Julian's eyes hardened. Facts require proof. Livia nodded once. I have it. The rooftop stilled again. Julian's voice sharpened. You said it was in a safe deposit box. It is. Under your name. Yes. Julian leaned back slightly. Then why are you here without it? Because she couldn't access it. Because someone had already tried. Because the box had been flagged yesterday. But she didn't say that. I needed to know if the trust would be honored, she said. Julian laughed softly. Honored? You think this is a courtroom? Nico watched her carefully. What aren't you saying? He asked quietly. Livia's breath caught. This was it. The real twist. The bank flagged the box yesterday, she said. Julian froze. Nico didn't blink. Flagged how? Nico asked. Access attempt, she said. I didn't request one? Julian's composure cracked again. That's impossible. Is it? She asked softly. Nico's gaze snapped to Julian. You tried to access it. Julian's voice rose for the first time. I did not. Security returned with the tablet log. Nico took it without looking away from Julian. He scanned. The room was silent except for distant city noise beyond the glass. Then, Nico's eyes stopped. Julian saw it. What? He demanded. Nico turned the screen slightly. Timestamp. Mezzanine auxiliary line. Outgoing call. Bank private access department. 9 seconds. Julian's face drained. That doesn't prove I made it. You were seated beside the line, Nico said calmly. So were 3 others. Nico nodded slowly. True. Julian exhaled in relief. Too soon. However, Nico continued, you were the only one who stood at 9:17. Julian didn't speak. Livia's pulse pounded. 9:17. The exact moment her phone vibrated. Nico looked at him steadily. Why did you call the bank? Julian's breathing changed. He masked it quickly. I didn't. Nico studied him. You're not good at lying when cornered. Julian's eyes flashed. You're choosing her over blood? Nico's voice was colder now. I'm choosing survival. Julian laughed again, but it sounded hollow. She's pregnant, he said. You think that makes her untouchable? Nico turned slowly toward Livia. 14 weeks? He asked. Yes. He nodded once. Daniel was meticulous, Nico murmured. He wouldn't leave leverage unguarded. Julian's voice sharpened. You're not seriously considering legitimizing this. Nico didn't answer. Instead, he gave an order. Escort Miss Hart to the private office. Livia's heart jumped. Julian stepped forward instantly. You're isolating her? Yes. And me? Nico's eyes met his. You'll stay here. The words hit harder than any accusation. Julian stared at him. You don't trust me? Nico's answer was quiet. Not tonight. Security moved toward Livia, not aggressively, protectively. Julian watched them, and for the first time since this began, he looked like a man losing ground. As Livia stepped away from the table, Julian's voice followed her. You think this protects you? She turned slightly. I think it changes the rules. Julian's jaw tightened. Be careful, he said softly. It's dangerous to carry something valuable in a room full of men who want it. Livia didn't break eye contact. I know. She placed her hand lightly over her abdomen. And so do you. Security escorted her toward the executive hallway. Behind her, the rooftop remained locked, and Julian Romano was no longer in control. The executive hallway was silent. No music, no guests, no polished laughter. Just soft carpet, recessed lighting, and the kind of quiet that only existed in places built for power. Livia walked between two of Nico Valente's men without being touched. They didn't rush her. They didn't intimidate her. They formed a perimeter. Protection or containment. The private office doors opened with a biometric scan. Inside, the room was minimalist. Dark wood, glass walls overlooking the skyline, a single long desk, and a leather chair positioned like a throne that didn't need decoration. Nico entered seconds later. The door closed behind him with a muted click. Now it was just the two of them. No Julian, no audience, no performance. Livia felt the shift immediately. On the rooftop, she had been a variable. In here, she was either an asset or a liability. Sit, Nico said. She did. He didn't take the chair behind the desk. Instead, he remained standing for a moment, watching her as if recalculating everything he thought he knew. You knew Daniel was investigating, he said. Yes. You encouraged it? No. Why not? Because I knew what would happen. Nico's eyes darkened slightly. And yet you're here. Yes. Why? She didn't hesitate. Because now it's not just about him. Silence stretched between them. Nico walked toward the window slowly, hands clasped loosely behind his back. Daniel was loyal, he said. Not to her, to the glass. Almost painfully so. I know. He wouldn't have created leverage without a reason. He thought he was protecting you. That made Nico turn. From what? Livia held his gaze. From whoever was siphoning 12%. Nico didn't react outwardly, but his breathing changed, just slightly. And you're certain it wasn't external? He asked. Yes? How? Because Daniel ruled that out first. Nico stepped closer again. What did he tell you about the clause? Livia swallowed. He said if anything happened to him, the trust would activate only if a biological heir existed. And if no heir, it dissolved. Into what? She held his eyes. Into your direct control. That landed. Not explosive. Strategic. Nico understood implications quickly. If someone had killed Daniel, and if that someone believed there was no heir, then the trust would collapse cleanly. Unless Julian's face flashed in her mind. You think Julian knew? Nico asked. Livia chose her words carefully. I think Julian didn't believe Daniel would risk tying assets to someone outside blood. And you are outside blood. Yes. Silence again. Then, are you certain the child is Daniel's? Nico asked quietly. The question didn't offend her. It was expected. Yes. Absolutely. Yes. He studied her face like he was scanning for tremors. There were none. Have you seen a doctor? He asked. Yes. Records? Yes. Bring them tomorrow. I will. Nico nodded once. Then, why didn't you tell me immediately after Daniel died? That question cut deeper than the rest, because it carried something else beneath it. Responsibility. You were surrounded, she said honestly. And I didn't know who I could trust. You trust me now? She hesitated. No, she said. That surprised him. But I trust your self-interest. A flicker of something, almost amusement, passed through his eyes. Explain. You won't let internal theft weaken your position, she said. And you won't let someone inside your organization make you look blind. Nico stared at her. You're either very intelligent, he said softly, or very dangerous. Maybe both. The corner of his mouth moved faintly. Meanwhile, on the rooftop, Julian paced. The guards stayed close, but not suffocating. He kept his composure externally. Internally, calculations were firing. The trust, the bank, the call log. He hadn't expected her to know about the mezzanine line. He hadn't expected Nico to lock the floor. He hadn't expected the pregnancy to be real. A guard's phone buzzed. Julian's eyes snapped to it. The guard stepped aside to answer quietly. Julian's pulse ticked faster. Something was happening. Inside the office, Nico's desk phone lit up. He ignored it at first. Then it rang again. He answered. Yes. Silence as he listened. His expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. When? He asked. Another pause. Understood. He hung up slowly. Livia's stomach tightened. What happened? She asked. Nico looked at her. The car downstairs. Her pulse spiked. What about it? It just left. Relief almost surfaced, until he continued. And another replaced it? Cold flooded her veins. Nico studied her reaction. You weren't expecting that? No. He nodded slightly. Good. She frowned faintly. What does that mean? It means whoever is watching you is patient, he said. Not reactive. He stepped closer again, which means this wasn't impulsive. Her heart thudded. You think it was planned tonight? I think you were meant to leave the building. The realization hit her, hard. The message, she whispered. Nico's eyes didn't leave hers. Yes, someone wanted me outside. Yes, and Julian accessed the bank. Yes. Her breath caught. You think they were coordinating? Nico didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked back to the desk and picked up a small folder. He placed it in front of her. Daniel Mercer's final quarterly report. Livia's fingers trembled slightly as she opened it. Numbers, columns, transfers. She scanned. Then she saw it. A small notation in the margin. Handwritten. Initialed. J.R. Her stomach dropped. Julian Romano. Nico watched her face change. You see it? He said quietly. Yes. He nodded once. That notation shouldn't exist. She looked up at him. You didn't write it? No. Silence. Heavy, calculated. Then Nico asked the question that shifted everything. If the child is Daniel's, he said slowly, and if the trust activates... He paused. Do you understand what that makes you? She swallowed. Yes. Say it. She held his gaze. Leverage. Nico shook his head once. Not just leverage. He leaned forward slightly. It makes you a liability to anyone who altered those numbers. The door behind them knocked once. One of his senior guards entered quietly. "Sir." "Yes." "We traced the second car." Nico didn't blink. "And?" "It's registered to a shell company." "Owner?" The guard hesitated. "Connected to Romano Holdings." The room went still. Livia felt her pulse in her ears. Nico's face didn't change, but something inside the room did. The illusion of uncertainty cracked. Julian wasn't just nervous. He was exposed. Nico nodded slowly. "Bring him," he said. The guard left. Livia looked at Nico. "What happens now?" she asked. He didn't look at her. He looked at the city beyond the glass. "Now," he said quietly, "we see who's been trying to kill my heir." Her breath caught. "My—" He didn't look at her. "If the child is Daniel's," he said evenly, "it carries assets that belong under my protection." He finally turned toward her. "And I don't let people steal from me." Footsteps approached the office door. Julian's voice carried faintly from the hallway. Tight, controlled, angry. The door opened, and for the first time tonight, Julian Romano walked into a room where he was not the predator. Julian Romano entered the office like a man who still believed he could control the room. He stopped 2 steps inside. He saw the folder on the desk. He saw Livia seated across from Nico. He saw the shift. His expression hardened. "You locked me out of my own floor," Julian said evenly. Nico didn't invite him to sit. "You accessed the mezzanine line," Nico replied calmly. Julian's eyes flicked to Livia, then back. "I told you. I check feeds." "You called a private bank," Nico said. Julian didn't respond. Nico stepped aside and turned the open folder toward him. Julian saw the handwritten notation. His jaw flexed once. "That's a draft mark," Julian said smoothly. "Preliminary." "It's your initials," Nico replied. Julian didn't blink. "Yes." Livia watched him closely. He wasn't panicking now. He was recalibrating. "Daniel was restructuring assets," Julian said. "He asked for my review." Nico didn't interrupt. Julian continued, gaining confidence. "He had concerns about liquidity. I advised him." "Did you advise him to move 12%? Nico asked. Julian's voice sharpened slightly. "There was no 12%. Livia spoke quietly. "There was." Julian turned toward her. "You don't understand corporate flow." "Daniel did," she replied. Julian smiled faintly. "And Daniel is dead." The words hung heavy. Nico's eyes shifted. "Be careful," he said softly. Julian spread his hands. "I'm stating reality." He stepped closer to the desk. "You're letting emotion distort this," Julian continued. "A pregnant woman shows up, makes dramatic claims, and suddenly I'm the villain." Nico didn't respond. Julian leaned forward. "You think I'd sabotage family operations over marginal percentages?" Livia's voice cut in. "It wasn't marginal." Julian's gaze snapped to her. "It was leverage." He froze. It was subtle, but it was there. Nico saw it. "So you knew," Nico said quietly. Julian's eyes darkened. "Knew what?" "That Daniel structured it as leverage." Julian hesitated, only for a breath. But in this room, that was enough. "You think I'd kill him over that?" Julian asked. Livia spoke before Nico could. "I think you panicked." Julian's control snapped. "I built half the expansion you're standing on," he said sharply to Nico. "I secured contracts. I negotiated the port agreements." Nico's voice remained calm. "And?" Julian exhaled hard. "And Daniel was slowing us down." The admission was small, but it cracked everything open. "Slowing," Nico repeated. "He was questioning too much," Julian said, trying to regain composure. "Audits, internal reviews, delays." "He was loyal," Nico said. "He was cautious," Julian corrected. Silence. Julian's breathing grew heavier. "I didn't kill him," he said. Nico's eyes stayed on him. "But you knew about the trust," Nico said. Julian didn't answer. "You knew if there was no heir, it dissolved." Julian looked at Livia, then back at Nico. I assumed there was no air. Livia felt the blood drain from her face. You assumed, Nico repeated. Julian's jaw tightened. He never mentioned a child. He didn't know yet, Livia said quietly. Julian's eyes flicked to her abdomen. Something cold passed through them. Convenient, he muttered. Nico stepped forward. Why access the bank? He asked. Julian's composure cracked again. I wanted confirmation. Of what? That she was lying. Livia shook her head slightly. You tried to access the box yesterday too, she said. Julian's head snapped toward her. How would you know that? She held his gaze. Because the bank flagged it. Julian's silence was answer enough. Nico didn't raise his voice. You moved too soon, he said quietly. Julian's breathing shifted. You're making this bigger than it is. Nico took one step closer. You accessed a secure deposit box under surveillance. You placed a car outside my building. You accessed internal lines. Julian didn't deny the car. That was the final crack. Livia saw it. Nico saw it. You weren't waiting for proof, Nico said. You were waiting for opportunity. Julian's mask dropped. She's destabilizing everything, he said sharply. If word spreads that a trust exists... It doesn't, Nico interrupted. Julian stared at him. Not yet, Nico continued calmly. The implication landed. Julian understood. Nico wasn't thinking about public scandal. He was thinking about internal correction. Julian stepped back slightly. You're going to side with her, he said quietly. Nico's voice was colder now. I'm siding with structure. Julian's eyes flashed. She's not family. Nico looked at Livia, then back at Julian. If the child is Daniel's, he said evenly, it is. Silence. Julian's face changed. Not anger, calculation. You don't have proof, Julian said carefully. Nico's gaze sharpened. DNA test, Julian continued. Private, controlled. Livia felt her pulse spike. Julian pressed. If she's telling the truth, you gain an heir. If she's lying, you eliminate a threat. Nico considered. Julian saw it. You're not certain, Julian said quietly. Nico's voice was calm. I'm certain of one thing. Julian waited. You moved assets without clearance. Julian's jaw clenched. Strategic positioning. Unauthorized, Nico corrected. Julian exhaled sharply. This is about control. Yes, Nico said. It was the most honest thing said all night. Julian looked at Livia again. You realize what happens if that test fails, he said softly. She didn't flinch. It won't. Julian held her gaze. Then, he smiled faintly. A different smile. Quieter. You're assuming I'm the only one who benefits from Daniel being gone. The room stilled. Nico's eyes narrowed slightly. Julian stepped toward the door. Run the test, he said calmly. You'll get your answer. He paused. But you might not like the rest of it. He walked out before security could block him. The door closed. Livia's pulse pounded. He's not done, she said quietly. No, Nico agreed. He walked to the desk and closed the folder slowly. He's cornered. That makes him dangerous. He was always dangerous, Nico replied. He looked at her directly. We run the test tomorrow. She nodded. And tonight? She asked. Nico's gaze shifted toward the window. The second car is still downstairs. Her stomach tightened. He turned back to her. You don't leave alone. She hesitated. You think he'd try something inside the building? Nico's voice was calm. I think he won't risk exposure. Then where? Nico's eyes held hers. On the way out. Her breath caught. Unless, he added quietly, you don't leave at all. Silence. You're keeping me here, she realized. For now. She swallowed. As protection? He didn't answer immediately. Then, as an asset. The honesty didn't offend her. It grounded her. Then let me be useful, she said. Nico's eyes sharpened. How? She reached into her apron pocket, and for the first time tonight, She pulled something out, a small flash drive. Julian hadn't expected that, neither had Nico. I didn't come empty-handed, she said quietly. Nico stared at it. What is it? Daniel's insurance. Silence fell heavy. And for the first time, Nico Valente looked genuinely surprised. Nico didn't reach for the flash drive immediately. He studied Livia first. Not the object. Her. Explain, he said quietly. She placed the drive on the desk between them. Daniel copied everything the night before he died, she said. Not just the trust documents. Nico's eyes flicked to the drive. What else? Internal transfer logs, authorization chains, shell routing. He didn't touch it yet. Why didn't you go to law enforcement? She almost smiled. Because law enforcement doesn't survive long in rooms like this. That earned a faint shift in his expression. Fair, he said. He finally picked up the drive and walked to a secure terminal built into the wall behind his desk. It required dual authentication. He didn't ask her to leave. That was deliberate. The screen lit up. Encrypted folders, dates, file names. Nico's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly as he opened one. Transaction logs filled the display. Livia watched his face. She didn't need to see the numbers. She had already. After Daniel died, she had spent nights memorizing them. Pause it there, she said softly. Nico stopped scrolling. She stepped closer, careful but steady. There, she said, pointing. A transfer, 12%. Rerouted through 3 entities. One final destination. Nico's eyes narrowed. That's a holding company, he said. Yes. He opened another file. Authorization signatures, digital clearance codes. Julian's access credentials appeared twice. Nico didn't speak for a long moment. The room felt heavier now. This wasn't speculation. This was structure. You kept this, Nico said quietly. Yes. Why not release it? She met his gaze. Because once I did, I'd be dead. He didn't argue. Instead, he asked the question that mattered most. Why give it to me? She didn't hesitate. Because you're the only person who benefits from keeping the organization intact. He studied her. And you? I benefit if my child isn't hunted. Silence. Heavy, strategic. Nico closed the folder slowly. You understand what this means? He said. Yes. Julian didn't just skim. No. He consolidated. Yes? And Daniel discovered it. Yes. Nico turned toward the window again. Outside, the city moved like nothing had shifted. But inside this room, the balance of power had tilted permanently. Behind them, the office door opened. One of Nico's senior guards entered. Sir? Yes? Romano left the rooftop. Nico didn't react. Alone? No. 2 cars. Destination? Unknown. Nico nodded once. Track him. The guard left. Livia's pulse quickened. He's moving fast, she said. He has to, Nico replied. He turned back to her. The test happens at 9 a.m. She nodded. And if it confirms? He didn't hesitate. Then the trust activates. And Julian? Nico's gaze hardened. He will step down. Voluntarily? A faint, humorless breath escaped him. No. She absorbed that. You'll remove him, she said, if necessary. Silence stretched between them. Then, why didn't you see it? She asked quietly. It wasn't accusation. It was curiosity. Nico didn't seem offended. Because he was ambitious, he said, not careless. And now? Now he's cornered. Livia's hand drifted again to her abdomen. He won't accept that quietly. No, Nico agreed. The secure phone on his desk buzzed. He answered. Yes. He listened. Longer this time. His expression didn't change, but something final entered his eyes. Understood, he said softly. He hung up. Livia's throat tightened. What? Julian's second car stopped 3 blocks away. Her pulse spiked. And? It hasn't moved. She swallowed. He's waiting. Yes. For what? Nico looked at her steadily. For you. The realization settled cold and sharp. He hadn't left to escape. He'd left to reposition. Your bait, she said quietly. For now, Nico replied. She exhaled slowly. You won't send me out? No. He stepped closer. Tonight, you stay here. Her heart pounded. In the building? Yes. Under guard? Yes. And tomorrow? He held her gaze. Tomorrow, we make it official. She felt the shift in the words. Official didn't mean public. It meant internal. Recognition, protection, claim. She nodded slowly. There was a knock at the door again. The senior guard returned. Sir? Yes. Romano just made a call. Nico didn't blink. To who? The guard hesitated. A private medical lab. Livia felt her blood go cold. He's running his own test, she whispered. Nico's eyes hardened. Yes. She swallowed. He's going to try to discredit it. Yes. And if he can't? Nico's voice was calm. Then he'll escalate. The room fell silent. For the first time since she walked into Orem House, Livia felt something beyond fear. Not safety, not relief. Momentum. She wasn't reacting anymore. She was reshaping the board. Nico closed the folder and removed the flash drive. This stays with me, he said. She nodded. He stepped closer one final time. You understand what happens if the test confirms? Yes. You become part of this. She held his gaze. I already am. Silence. Then, the building lights flickered once. Brief, subtle, but noticeable. Both of them turned toward the ceiling instinctively. Nico's phone buzzed again. He answered immediately. What? He listened. His expression shifted for the first time all night. Not anger, not calculation. Alarm. They cut external power for 6 seconds, he said. Livia's stomach dropped. That wasn't a glitch, she whispered. No. Nico's voice lowered. He's not waiting anymore. The emergency generators hummed back to full strength. Security footsteps moved rapidly in the hallway. The rooftop floor was still locked. The building was secure, but someone had just tested its edges. Nico looked at Livia. This ends tomorrow. She nodded. Outside the glass walls, the city lights flickered in the distance. And somewhere 3 blocks away, Julian Romano realized he was running out of time. The emergency lights stabilized within seconds. But the silence that followed was different. Not confusion, expectation. Nico didn't raise his voice. He didn't bark orders. He moved. Full lockdown, he said calmly into his phone. Internal only. No one in or out without my clearance. Security responded instantly. Footsteps multiplied in the hallway. Livia stood very still. He's trying to force your hand, she said. Yes? Why cut the power? To measure response time, Nico replied. She absorbed that. He's testing perimeter weakness. Yes. And if he finds one? Nico's eyes met hers. He won't. But she understood something now. This wasn't just about money or control. It was about succession, and Julian had just shown his hand too openly. Minutes later, the senior guard returned again. Sir? Yes? Romano's vehicle moved. Where? Back toward the building. Livia's pulse spiked. He's coming back? She asked. Nico nodded slightly. He's realized running looks like guilt. Or he wants confrontation, she said. Yes. The elevator indicator outside the office blinked. Private access. Nico didn't look surprised. The office door opened. Julian stepped inside again. No smile this time. No theatrics. Just tension. You locked the building? Julian said. Yes, Nico replied. Julian's gaze flicked to Livia. She's still here. Yes. Julian exhaled sharply. You're making a mistake. Nico didn't invite him further in. You accessed the bank. Yes. Julian didn't deny it now. You altered internal routing. Julian didn't answer. You placed surveillance on her. Julian's jaw tightened. For containment. Nico's voice lowered. For elimination. Julian's eyes flashed. I didn't kill Daniel. But you would have removed the problem, Nico said. Silence. Julian's composure cracked just slightly. You don't understand the scale, he said. We were expanding. Fast. Daniel was slowing everything down with audits and clauses. He was protecting structure, Nico replied. He was creating vulnerability, Julian shot back. Livia watched carefully. This wasn't about guilt anymore. It was ideology. Julian stepped forward. If the trust activates, assets freeze, expansion halts, competitors move in. Nico didn't blink. And if internal theft continues, we rot from inside. Julian's breathing grew heavier. She's a variable. She's proof, Nico said calmly. Julian looked at Livia directly. You think he's protecting you? She held his gaze. No. That caught him off guard. He's protecting stability, she continued. Julian's eyes hardened. You're not family. She didn't flinch. If the DNA confirms, I am. The words hung in the air. Julian looked back at Nico. You'd recognize it publicly? Yes, Nico said. Julian went still. You'd let a waitress carry legacy? Nico's voice was even. I'd let Daniel's heir carry it. Silence. Julian's jaw tightened. You're choosing sentiment. No, Nico replied. I'm choosing continuity. Julian stared at him. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, Julian's shoulders lowered slightly. A shift, not surrender. Acceptance. You'll run the test tomorrow, Julian said quietly. Yes. And if it confirms, you step down. Julian's eyes flickered once. And if it doesn't? Nico didn't hesitate. She leaves. Livia didn't flinch. Julian studied her. You're confident? Yes. He let out a slow breath. You're either brave, he said, echoing Nico's earlier words, or reckless. She met his gaze evenly. I'm a mother. That landed differently. Julian looked at her abdomen again. For the first time. He didn't see leverage. He saw permanence. He turned back to Nico. You'll regret this, he said quietly. Perhaps, Nico replied. Julian walked to the door. He paused once. If that child is Daniel's, he said without turning around, it changes everything. Yes, Nico said. Julian left. The door closed. Silence filled the office. Livia exhaled slowly. He's not finished, she said. No, Nico agreed, but he's contained. She looked at him. For now. He nodded once. Tomorrow, he said, we make it structural. She felt something shift inside her, not fear. Resolution. Months later. The skyline looked different from the top floor, not because the city changed, because she did. Livia stood near the glass wall of a private residence 2 floors below the former rooftop club. The morning light hit the river in silver streaks. Her hand rested over a visible curve now, 6 months along. The DNA test had confirmed what she already knew. Daniel's heir. The trust activated. Assets locked. Julian resigned quietly under internal pressure. No headlines. No scandal. Just restructuring. Nico Valenti entered the room behind her. He didn't speak immediately. You're adjusting, he said finally. Yes? This world isn't gentle. I know. He stepped beside her, looking out over the city. The board will meet next week. She nodded. They'll formalize the trust. Yes. Silence. Then, you could have disappeared, he said. She looked at him. So could you. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his expression. The child will be protected, he said. I know. And you? She turned back toward the skyline. I stopped running. The city stretched endlessly below. Some people mistook silence for weakness. Some mistook pregnancy for vulnerability. They were wrong, because in a room full of powerful men, the most dangerous thing had not been money, or leverage, or ambition. It had been a woman who refused to leave. If this story kept you watching until the end, you already understand how power really shifts.